It's sure quiet around here. You could hear a caterpillar sneaking across a moss bed in tennis shoes. Why, that must mean it's time for vaguely scientific. Ain't I a stinker? I am Derek. Be very quiet. I'm hunting Jim the scientist. Hi, Jim.
Well, thank goodness it's Elmer. I'm never going to be hurt at all.
I feel like we could do like a Looney Tunes type thing where you're like thwarting me like Bugs Bunny. That'd be fun. I thought putty tat. I did, Todd. Jonathan. Hello, Jonathan.
Hey, all.
You have a bunch of cats.
Yes. I did that one specifically because you have cats.
4 of them, and they're all a menace.
As are all cats.
And so is Dennis.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
I'm doing cartoons. I don't know.
I mean, you're not wrong.
So this is the show where listeners send in questions to hear our vaguely scientific answers, and who knows, we might even get some of the answers right. But first, it's time for Jim's fun science fact of the day, Jim.
All right. The mean sea level is the average sea level across the entire surface of the Earth. Now, most people think the sea level is constant, but sea level actually varies quite a bit across the entire surface of the planet. And some of the things that can affect sea level include currents, prevailing winds, and gravitational anomalies.
Ooh.
I was expecting gravitational, just not anomalies.
Yeah, it's interesting. There are areas of our planet that have slightly more and slightly less gravity. Not enough that you'd ever notice it, but like enough that it will affect sea level.
Huh.
So you are saying beyond just the shift in tide, right?
Right, yeah. It's like the average across the entire planet.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And if I recall correctly, I didn't look into this, but I think I've heard this. I believe that the Atlantic Ocean and Pacific Ocean are different enough in height that when they built the Panama Canal, that was like a consideration they had to think about.
Huh.
That makes sense.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Science.
I think it's neat that there are a bunch of gravitational anomalies around our planet.
That's what has me concerned.
Well, it's just because like different areas of our planet have different like materials that make them up, and things that are more dense, like iron, are going to have more gravity than like a big, silicon deposit or something like that.
Right. And you have
fair.
enough of it, it's just going to make a problem.
Right. And I think that at this point we can actually use that to help us find like metal, like loads of metal that we can dig up.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think it's just that all the iron in the earth, there's a giant magnet in space and it's pulling us around.
Yeah, it's the giant magnet is the Earth.
Oh, okay. Well, with the fun science fact out of the way, we should probably talk about our first question.
Mm-hmm.
And question 1 this week comes to us from Daniel. If you were in an indestructible case, what height would still kill you if you fell?
I think that the idea of being in a case and falling is very unappealing. Not for any further reason than just that you're in a box and you're falling, and I presume that you won't be able to see where you're going, because I feel like anything that's transparent is not going to be super indestructible.
Ooh, well, okay.
Unless you know otherwise.
I looked at what would be indestructible because there's a few different directions we could go here, because I was like, the first thing I thought of was the old, I don't know where this comes from, but I've seen it in a lot of TV shows and on the internet. The idea that if you are in a falling elevator, if you jump at the last minute, the myth that like maybe you could save yourself there. And to debunk that just immediately, your velocity inside that elevator matches the elevator. So jumping does not mitigate that.
Right, yeah. And I think they even did that on Mythbusters at one point.
Oh, they probably did. That might be where I'm thinking. No, I'm thinking of Scrubs. They made that joke in Scrubs.
Of course.
It's a one-off joke, but that's what I was thinking of. But then I started thinking, if you were falling out of like a plane or something and didn't have a parachute, or like couldn't have a parachute, how much like padding would you need to make it safe? Mm-hmm. And so rough calculations based on very little, it's looking like maybe you'd need like 30 feet of padding around you, and it would have to be squishy and stuff. And here's why I'm going on that tangent. Mm-hmm. When we say indestructible case, of course there are many different ways to interpret this, because a sponge ball could be theoretically indestructible. But
I see.
if we had like a car, and the car was made out of a material that couldn't bend and stayed perfectly intact, that is less protective of the passengers than a car that crumples.
Right. And that's actually, you hit the nail on the head, where I sort of interpreted it as something that's not going to yield, because the container is indestructible.
Right.
But I guess you're right. I mean, if you drop a pillow out of an airplane, the pillow is probably going to be fine when it hits the ground.
Ooh, yeah.
But, I mean, theoretically also, there's a very slim chance that if a person falls out of an airplane, and this has happened at least once that I know of, they can survive the fall.
Yeah. There's a list of them somewhere on the internet that like people who have it's a very small list.
Yeah.
But you get into this elite club for falling for your parachute failing and you surviving.
I don't
Is
need
it
to
like
be in
the
that
reverse
club.
Mile High Club?
Yeah, basically.
But
it's less fun.
Yeah. That's yeah. Oh man. But so I was thinking, actually, I looked into basically what is the average height that will kill you for sure.
Oh,
and I didn't find a specific answer about that, because there does not appear to be a specific height at which it is 100% impossible to survive. I imagine if you fell from outer space, for example, that would probably kill you. Not the least of which the fact that you might burn up in the atmosphere. But
Sure.
There is, I'm assuming, a theoretical maximum where you cannot survive. But what I did find, which I thought was pretty interesting, was the sort of mean average height where you have a 50% chance of dying and a 50% chance of living.
Okay.
And apparently that height is just a little bit under 50 feet. I heard anywhere between like 47 to 49 feet. That is the height. If you fall 49 feet, for example, you have about a 50% chance of dying and a 50% chance of living. And I imagine a lot of it depends heavily on how you fall and onto what you fall. But so that's apparently a thing, the mean average height that you can die.
That's interesting. And 50 feet came up in one of the things that I was looking up, because terminal velocity for a human is on average 120 to 150 miles per hour. Mm-hmm. And it takes you about 50 feet to reach that, as far as I could find.
Oh, interesting.
I don't have a verified source on that one.
Mm-hmm.
Just pointing that out.
I feel like your verified source could be an old episode of ours.
That's true.
Is it?
I swear I was on an episode that we kind of talked about what's the highest that you can fall. Oh, I think it was the HP episode.
Oh, yeah, probably.
That we were talking about what's the HP of a person, and then we kind of went from using fall distance and fall height, because this all sounds vaguely familiar.
Vaguely familiar?
Yeah.
That happens far too often, because vaguely is just in my normal speech pattern.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. I think you're right, because I think we talked about fall damage in that one exactly as you said, and it's starting to come back to me. Yeah.
So then I was kind of thinking about that episode and stuff that we went through with that episode, and that's probably been like 3 years at this point, because I remember it being an early one. And I also
I'll take
feel
your
like
word for it.
we have an opportunity to be like a Stan Lee Excelsior, check out this episode number. But
yeah.
I can't remember it off the top of my head.
Yeah, we got 3 weeks. We can find it.
Yeah. I'll put it in the show notes.
Fair enough.
Check out the show notes to see that episode.
There you go. I was still on the idea, the theoretical idea is I'm just assuming this case is indestructible. I don't know what it's made of. I'm just assuming it's indestructible in perfect physics world. So then the boring answer to that question is it's just normal fall height, because it's not the fall that kills you, it's the impact.
Yeah.
So then we would start needing to like make a human egg drop, more or less. What can we stack in this indestructible container that's going to cushion the blow for the human inside the box?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good point. So the container is perhaps like inflexible or whatever, but there is padding inside of it.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I just off the top of my head, pillows is a common one. That you see with foam. Just wrapping eggs in string.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, what if your indestructible container is actually more like a scaffolding and you're like rubber banded in the middle, like an egg?
Okay.
I can't imagine a less pleasant way to decelerate. Actually, speaking of things dropping from outer space, when we've landed smaller rovers on Mars, including Spirit and Opportunity, they enter the atmosphere in this container, and then these airbags inflate, and the parachute detaches, and this container wrapped in airbags hits the ground, and it rolls for about 2 miles, or I think maybe 2 kilometers. Either way, it rolls for a ludicrously long distance because its deceleration has become forward velocity instead of vertical velocity. And that's one of the ways that we used to land rovers on Mars. Now, this was for very small ones, like I said. So we have not done this with things like Perseverance and Curiosity. But, it's not too far off from what we're talking about, I suppose.
Yeah. I didn't cross my mind of like changing your direction of velocity as a way to cushion the blow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's, so I have a little bit of statistics, not statistics, but numbers. So everybody tune out now, I guess. But like you said, it's not the falling, it's the landing that is scary. People surviving a fall doesn't depend on the velocity they were traveling. It doesn't depend on the distance they were traveling. It depends on the rate of deceleration. And your body can tolerate, according to my research, pushes up glasses. Your body can tolerate a deceleration force of about 50 to 100 Gs.
Oh, okay.
Without fatal injury. So it's not good for you.
Not without zero injury, just without fatal.
Not without zero. Yeah.
Keyword there.
Yeah.
So in order to survive a fall at terminal velocity, this is assuming you're traveling at terminal velocity, you would need to decelerate to 0 over 6 to 10 meters or 20 to 33 feet. Which is why cushioning or the crumple effect to disperse your inertia is what's going to protect you there. So even if you were suddenly, and we can harken back, you mentioned Stan Lee, we can harken back to Spider-Man, and the tragic death of Gwen Stacy. It was pretty famous. Gwen Stacy falls off of a bridge and Spider-Man thwips to catch her with a web, and just that basically whiplash effect of suddenly stopping in midair caused her to perish.
Right. Yeah, I think it's becoming a deeper question than I thought, because I was just like, okay, how do you kill a person in a box? And now we're starting to think of ways to not kill the person in the box, which I think is probably for the best.
What's in the box?
You have to figure out. You have to figure out what kills them, and then step back until it doesn't kill them.
Yeah, that's true.
I think that's your scientific process there.
If you want to boil it down to what I think Jim was alluding to, the very simple answer to the question, what height would still kill a person, like the normal height, is the answer to the literal question.
Well, and then it also, again, depends on whether you have padding in your box or not, because I was just thinking it was like a steel crate. And so if it bounces, you are going to get jostled a lot more severely than if you have padding. So, for example, let's say there was a movie where a guy goes into a refrigerator and gets launched several kilometers downrange of a nuclear explosion. They would never make that movie. I don't think anyone would make that movie. But
that doesn't sound familiar.
But if somebody did do that, the being jostled would also kill you. I mean, even if you don't move all that fast, if you were rolling down a hill inside of a refrigerator, there's a pretty good chance that that's going to do some pretty serious damage to you. Even if you're going slow enough that if you were just rolling down the hill by yourself without being in a large steel box, you would be okay.
But there's no issue with swinging on vines like Tarzan and keeping up with
No,
cars.
I think that there's never been a movie like that either. No one's ever made that movie because that's a bad movie. No one would think to do that. Come on. One of the other things that I think is kind of interesting is that there are ways to fall to minimize your damage. So, if you were falling, let's say 49 feet, and you are able to see where you're going and you're able to see the ground, you're able to sort of time your reaction to that, there's a possibility you could fall in such a way that you can reduce damage to your body. A lot of people say, like, oh, if you're falling, you should try to tuck and roll. Or if you're trying to slow down, like jumping out of a car, you want to tuck and roll. You want to roll yourself into a ball, try to convert some of your velocity into a direction that's going to be less painful for you. And so, stunt people do this all the time where they will fall in such a way that they will make sure they don't get hurt. Even just falling as a pratfall, like from a standing height to the floor, you could easily dislocate your shoulder if you don't fall correctly.
Sure.
But if you're inside of a container and you can't see where the ground is, you can't see where you're going, you won't be able to catch yourself in the way that might minimize the fall damage that you're going to take, even if you're only falling like 20 feet inside of a box.
Yeah. I think we may have referenced it on this show before, but I couldn't tell you when. But there is a YouTube video out there that is instructions for how to survive a fall, like a skydive, if your parachute doesn't open. And it's done like in a tongue-in-cheek kind of way. And one of the things they say, because the idea is if you have your legs below you, they will absorb the initial impact. And the idea being that you are dispersing as much of that force before your internal organs and your brain hit the ground. And like they make it very clear, your legs will break.
No more legs, but still alive.
But alive, yeah.
Right.
You will be injured. There's no avoiding that, but you will be alive. Possibly.
Better injured than not alive.
I shouldn't say you will be alive, but like you have the best odds of being alive.
That's like using your legs as a crumple zone, basically. You're decelerating by sacrificing your lower body.
Pretty much. The worst thing you can do is like the belly smack, just like
right,
all at once.
Yeah. Another thing I was thinking about was just like depending on where you're being dropped, you can try, like if you are able to see where you're going, you could try to aim for something that is maybe going to break your fall a little bit better. I don't really know. If you fell out of an airplane, I don't know what the best thing to aim for would be. I know falling into water isn't really going to make any difference than falling on the ground because at that speed, it's basically hard anyway. But I don't know if it would be better to try to like fall into a bunch of shrubs or even trees or something like that, like hit some branches and break your fall that way. But
I read that because like you said, hitting water, the surface tension, you're still hitting just a basically flat plane.
Yeah.
So I read that if you can, falling into trees is better because again, you're still going to get injured and there's no guarantee that still won't kill you, but you're going to hit slight cushion and like it's going to slow you down more gradually than just a sudden drop.
Yeah.
I feel like that also comes with an asterisk of try to aim for the branches of a tree and not the main trunk of the tree, because that's
totally
just
fair.
That's just gonna be the same as hitting a ground plus impalation.
Yeah, you're falling and there's like an upright flagpole. Should you aim for that? No.
No. I mean, unless you want to lose your hands to friction burn, maybe. Another one I've seen, kind of going back to the airplane, falling out of airplanes. I think there was a story about a lady that had fallen out of an airplane or was parachuting, and she hit a house and because of the same like idea as hitting a tree, you break through the layers, and that's really helped cushion her fall. Obviously, she didn't walk away with walk away at all, but walk away with no injuries.
Right.
I think she broke a hip, maybe some legs, but she did survive because she found something to hit that absorbed a lot of her velocity from falling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It's all about rate of deceleration.
I was reminded of the Jeremy Clarkson quote, which goes roughly, speed has never killed anyone. It's the sudden stop. That's what gets you.
There it is. That I knew I heard something along that lines. I could not remember where it was from.
Well, that's what the reference I made earlier was Rincewind from Discworld. It's not the falling, it's the landing.
It's the sudden stop at the end.
Same kind of vein. Yeah.
I think if we could just, that's the trick, is to find the way to make that sudden stop a little bit less sudden.
Yeah. Just take your time. You don't need to, you're in no hurry.
You have the rest of your life to figure it out.
Yeah.
That was good.
Well, with question 1 out of the way, I think it's time we take a little trip to the Pacific Ocean with World's Best World. So right there, smack in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, we have the Hawaiian Islands. And the Hawaiian Islands are a tourist hotspot and a volcanic hotspot. See what I did there? Good, I'm glad you laughed. I was worried it was just going to be me. Anyway, one of the things that's really cool about the Hawaiian Islands is that they are actually part of a much larger chain of mountains. So, as you probably know, the Hawaiian Islands were formed by a large volcanic hotspot under the Pacific Plate. The magma in this hotspot is melting its way through the plate, which forms the volcanoes, which then has constructed the islands out of layer upon layer of lava. But the Hawaiian Islands are only the most recent additions to a much larger mountain range. Some of them are still technically visible above the ocean. There is a series of atolls that stretch off to the northwest of Hawaii. Some of these are U.S. territories. Some of them are national parks and things like that. But past those atolls, there is a series of mountains underneath the ocean. This mountain range is called the Emperor Seamount Chain, and it continues across the Pacific Ocean all the way up to the Aleutian Trench off the coast of Russia. So basically the entire length of the ocean. And these seamounts all formed the exact same way that the Hawaiian Islands did through volcanoes. As the Pacific Plate moved across that hotspot, the volcanic islands formed one by one. The islands rose up out of the sea. But then as the plate kept moving, the hotspot stayed put, and those mountains moved off of the hotspot. The volcanoes went extinct, and those mountains eroded back down underneath the ocean as the seawater sort of blasted them away through waves. One of the things I think is really cool about this is that in the middle of the seamount chain, there is a sharp change in direction for the underwater mountains. And the scientists aren't really sure whether or not the direction of the Pacific Plate changed or if the hotspot itself moved into a slightly different position underneath that plate. And so there's a lot more research that needs to be done on this topic. A couple other things I think are really neat about this. First off, if you look at a map of the Pacific Ocean on Google Maps or what have you can actually see this island change kind of going across the Pacific Ocean. And the other thing that I think is really neat is that there is a brand new volcano forming to the east of the Hawaiian Islands. As the plate continues moving, it's going to keep on making new volcanoes with the motion of that plate. So in roughly the next 100,000 years or so, this new volcano will emerge above the sea and become the next Hawaiian island.
Cool.
So keep an eye out for that, I guess.
Yeah, we'll be around.
Sure.
You wrote that line and it made me laugh, so I wanted to make sure it was.
Oh, I forgot. I was just using this as like my guide, and I wasn't really reading it verbatim. And now I kind of wish that I had seen that.
Yeah, it made me laugh, and I was like waiting for you to say it, and I was like, because I could tell you were just using them as like cliff notes.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, that was funny, Jim.
Yeah, but keep an eye out for it because we'll be here. Episode 26 million or no 216,000. I don't know. I can't convert this.
I don't know. We do time travel in this universe.
That's true.
So
That's true.
I don't know. So Jim, I have I don't know if this is a dumb question, but what specifically does it mean for a volcano to be extinct?
So an extinct volcano is not going to erupt again. Okay. And that is different than a dormant volcano. In a dormant volcano potentially could erupt again. We may not have enough information to know whether or not something is totally extinct versus dormant, but in the case of the seamount chain, these appear to be extinct.
Okay. That's what I assumed it meant, but I just wanted to make sure.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty cool.
I think it's kind of interesting because that's an important distinction for things like Mount Rainier, for instance, in Washington State, where that's probably just dormant, but it's very bad if it erupts.
We're hoping for extinct, but most likely dormant.
Yeah, exactly.
Fair enough, I suppose. Well, with our world's best world out of the way, let's tackle our second question for the week. And I feel like we could talk about this one forever. No?
I get it.
What is
perpetually even.
what is the closest we can get to perpetual motion? Oh boy, not very.
This podcast.
Once started, we'll just keep making episodes.
We'll just keep going and going. Oh, the Energizer Rabbit is the
there we go.
closest we can
yeah.
get. There we go.
The Energizer Bunny beat Darth Vader once.
That's true. I remember that.
Oh, man, I think I remember that commercial.
I do remember that.
There you go. Energizer Bunny's at least as good as Darth Vader.
So before we get into the actual physics, which are going to be far more, I don't know, like intelligible than anything I have to say about this, I wanted to point out what comes to mind immediately now to me when I think of perpetual motion, and it is various random feeds and TikTok videos that pop up on social media that are all hoaxes. And the one I can mostly think of is there's a little looping ramp where a metal ball falls down and then is flung back up to the start, so that the little metal ball just allegedly through gravity continues to loop. And this is the reason I want to bring this up is for something a little tangential, but still thought was interesting. The way that works is that there's actually magnets that propel the ball, and they're finely crafted such that it will, make its mark and it won't just fling the little metal ball somewhere. And it's a desk toy.
I have some notes on that one.
Oh, do you? Okay, I look forward to that. But I wanted to, the main reason I wanted to bring it up though, is because I was reading over the years, seeing people get so irate in the comment section about these things, saying this is fake, this is a lie. And I think that that's a little funny because to me, specifically when people say this is a scam, it doesn't really work. I'm like, well, actually, this little device does work. It's just not perpetual motion. And I'm like, what is the scam exactly? Because to me, that's like, that rabbit was in the hat the whole time. This is a scam. Like, it's a magic trick. And this is where it gets into a tangent, and we can quickly come back from this. But this has evolved into, I'm now seeing a bunch of AI generated CGI videos of giant monsters or aliens or something. And the comments are always fake. I don't believe it. This is AI. And I always kind of think, yes, obviously it is, obviously the CGI. And I'm waiting for the time in our culture, and I don't think we're too far away from it. Let me put my tinfoil hat on. I'm waiting for the day where we go watch a sci-fi movie and people are walking out of the theater angry that wasn't real. Say this movie lied to us.
I mean, I think a lot of people are angry when those kinds of things aren't real because they're like, oh, that would be so cool if it was real. But I know exactly what you mean.
I just think it just makes me laugh. It's not a problem for me.
Yeah.
I just think it's amusing.
But I mean, one of the things I think is kind of interesting about the whole thing with perpetual motion is that on very small scales, there are things that you can do to simulate perpetual motion. And so some of the things you said, and one of the ones that I thought was really fun was the little toy that's the bird that the beak goes down into the water
Dunking
and then it comes
bird.
back up.
Yeah.
And I guess that works because of the difference in temperature between the water and the air. But
a very slight difference.
Yeah. as soon as the water evaporates enough that there's not quite as much water touching the bird's beak, then it stops working.
So that's the one I looked up as well. It's pretty much a heat engine.
Yeah.
So they have between vapor pressure and the liquid that they have in the bird, between the two glass bulbs on either end of it, when it gets liquid on one side, on its beak, and it causes some of it to condense and the water goes back down to the bottom and it tips up and then it heats back up because of the difference in temperature once again, and that's what goes back and forth. But still, it still requires an outside stimulus to start it.
I see. Yeah.
Which is, we can get close to one of the morals of the story is we can get close to perpetual motion, but not perfect because it always requires an outside force acting on it. Mm-hmm. All the ones I looked up are involved with that.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I thought was really fascinating was just the idea that the solar system is kind of in perpetual motion, but that has more to do with the fact that there just aren't that many forces acting to slow things down. So if for some reason, like a large amount of sand ended up in our solar system such that there was enough of it that it could slow down planets, then it would stop the perpetual motion and the planets would slow down and fall into the sun or go on wildly oblong orbits or something like that. So like things can keep on moving as long as nothing's there to stop them. But you couldn't really say that the solar system is in perpetual motion because if something came along and stopped them, then that would be that.
Well, that's interesting that you said that specifically, because one of the things that I read was somebody saying that the Earth revolving around the sun, disclaimer, this is wrong. But so the Earth revolving around the sun, gravity is pulling the Earth toward, part of it is correct. But ultimately, the ultimate conclusion is wrong. The Earth's gravitational force is pulling the Earth toward it, but the Earth's weight in moving in like laterally to the sun is causing it to have that equilibrium, right? And their suggestion was that because the Earth and the sun are, I don't know how to phrase this in a not insulting way, are the same mass.
Okay.
They will forever just circle each other. That was and I was like, nope, we're moving on. But
okay.
But I wanted to use this to illustrate, and this is kind of like if you look at like a marble funnel. If you take a funnel and you put marbles in it and they move around it, they'll take quite a while to finally get to the center. Mm-hmm. And this is my question for Jim, because I genuinely don't know for sure. But is the Earth slowly getting closer to the sun?
That I actually don't know.
Okay.
Because the thing is that the orbital mechanics gets kind of weird in a lot of ways because, for example, the moon is actually getting further away from the Earth.
I did know that one.
And it's not because the moon is going faster. At least I don't think so. I think it's just a matter of like the moon is being tugged on by other things besides the Earth and the sun, and like everything is pulling on everything basically. So sometimes things can move in ways that you wouldn't predict they would based on, sort of a ground-based idea of how physics works. But one of the things that I think is kind of interesting about that is that we can affect things in very, very small ways by doing what we call gravitational slingshots, which is when you fly a satellite past a planet or a moon or whatever. And as the satellite approaches the large object, its gravity pulls it in, it accelerates as it falls in, and you just barely miss it. And it maintains a lot of that extra speed as it gets flung around the back of the planet. And that technically would slow down the orbit of a planet. But because of the tremendous mass difference between the planet and the tiny, tiny satellite, it doesn't really affect it that much. Like, we're never going to stop Jupiter from moving. Although theoretically, you could do this if you had enough mass, which is actually one of the ways that has been proposed that, when the sun expands and gets bigger, we could maybe fling asteroids behind Earth to tug it backwards very slowly away from the sun. Just by transferring energy between objects.
I was just going to say we could all move to Jupiter and then we'd be Jovians.
Yeah. I mean, you could move to Europa. I've read 2010, the year we make contact.
I haven't.
Oh, I have not either.
I think it's better than 2001.
I like that the Wikipedia page for perpetual motion, first paragraph's introduction, second paragraph is planets are not perpetual motion.
Really? Wow.
Yes.
That's good.
Yeah, because it is.
So that maybe is a more common claim than I realized.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why people would think that, because it seems like it'd be very difficult to stop a planet, but it can be done. And in fact, it seems as though it's something that has happened in the past, not to stop planets, but to like wildly alter the way our solar system works. Because one of the leading theories about how our solar system formed was that Jupiter and Saturn ended up in an orbital resonance. Basically, every time Jupiter orbited once, Saturn orbited exactly twice. And this flung Uranus and Neptune further out into our solar system. So while our planets do keep on moving, it's more because there's just not really anything in space to stop them. If someone tried to harness the motion of the planets, it could theoretically slow them down. Like I said, with the gravitational slingshot, you are technically slowing the planet down because there's such a mass difference that doesn't affect it in any meaningful way. Mm-hmm. But you can't, if we tried to harness them to power something, it would, do something. So
there's a whole Futurama episode about that.
I was going to say that's similar to jumping in the elevator. Is you are not reducing your velocity by like a
significant amount to not die.
Yeah, but it's on a much grander scale.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, what I've read, like human beings just walking around, very, very slightly affect the rotation of the Earth, but like so insignificantly that it's like negligible.
Right.
And the 6 billion amount of it happening every day.
Right.
It's cancels out. This doesn't work. That does. This is wrong directions. And it's so minute anyway.
Yeah. But like technically it is. In the same way that this is another fun fact that I have. You weigh less in the dark because there is less, because light isn't pushing down on you, but it's such a minute, like, it's just fun. It's a fun thing.
Along that lines too, another interesting fact like that is you're taller in the morning.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I haven't heard that one.
Oh, yeah. You are actually taller in the morning because you're not standing perpendicular to gravity.
Yeah, your cartilage expands overnight.
Yep. While you're laying parallel to gravity overnight, your cartilage expands, and in the morning, it's actually a noticeable difference.
Okay.
I'm not say like a foot, but like
an
inch, maybe.
I thought you were going to say something else because there's another really interesting fact about light, which is a perpetual motion machine in a way. It's not really, because it's using light to power it, but it's this little gizmo called a radiometer. And
yeah.
The one side's painted black, the other side's painted white, and the difference in light pressure on there basically is what pushes it. And a lot of people think, oh, those are perpetual motion machines, but kind of like the bird in the water, it only works until its quote unquote fuel source runs out. So, you throw a towel over it and it's going to stop immediately.
Are those, because so what you're describing, and we talked about it several episodes ago, I remember. Mark was on it, but it basically looks like a little light bulb or a dome, and it's a vacuum, and it has this like pinwheel inside. In the, you described white versus black, and I wanted to ask, is that the same as like solar power, or is that different?
Yeah, that's actually different, because solar power uses a special material where the sunlight actually knocks the electrons off of the material, which then induces the electric current.
Oh, okay. Neat.
Weirdly up my alley with two things tonight. Did a little senior project on solar panels at Slippery Rock, and that was a lot of fun, and it was interesting to find out like how they actually work.
It's weird that we had the physics guy on the physics episode.
Almost like the physics guy picked the physics questions. You, Derek, have actually seen a radiometer in life, in person. My parents' house, on the windowsill, they have one up there.
Yeah, we actually used to have one, and your dad might have given it to us. I don't remember for sure.
Maybe, I don't know.
It was like a little desk toy one.
Yeah, yep. Yeah. Fun thing about the radiometer, too, he found it by accident. Crookes, William Crookes, I believe, but Crookes was trying to measure the mass of something, and it was so small and minute that he noticed he was trying to do it in a partial vacuum to minimize any interference. And that's how he found out that, the sunlight is changing the mass of this. He ended up making the Crookes radiometer.
I tell you, these scientists with their discoveries, sometimes this is going to be one of the dumbest things I've ever said, but these scientists sometimes with their discoveries, I'm like, how did you go from you observed a little pinwheel spinning to being like, oh, it's interesting that that's happening just because light's hitting it? I'd like, oh, that's crazy.
How can I take this to some kind of logical conclusion?
Yeah. I can't do that. I don't have the attention span.
Another fun one with the radiometer, it doesn't need to be a black side and a silver or white side. They can be convex. It can be the vanes on the radiometer can be convex and concave, and that's enough of a difference to get it to spin inside the partial vacuum.
Interesting. Okay.
I think University in Texas figured that out in like early 2000s, maybe 2016 at the latest.
That's interesting.
That's a thing that I just wouldn't have thought to look up. So I'm just really glad that you shared that with us.
Yeah. The radiometer works in a partial vacuum, and the sunlight warms the black side, and that's what causes it to move. But it's enough that the air will push the vanes in the radiometer, but there's not enough air resistance to stop it. But it's still not actual perpetual motion because there's an outside energy source affecting it, sunlight.
Yeah. I was reading one proposed thing using magnets, levitation with magnets. And like it was this whole description of this is how it could be like it doesn't use a fuel source, and like it's held above the surface with magnetic force. And then the very next thing was it will require a lot of electricity to power these magnets. And I was like, then it's not even remotely close to perpetual motion.
Right.
Like this doesn't run on batteries. It doesn't run on power. It has an extension cord. Like, what? Right.
Speaking of batteries, those perpetual marble machines that you were talking about at the top of this question.
Yeah.
So what it uses is it has an electromagnet at the bottom of the curve when the marble drops down through. And that magnet has an inductive proximity center right before the magnet. So it can turn the magnet on when the ball drops. Right. The magnet will be on. And when the ball drops, it'll pass that little sensor, turn off the magnet so it can fly back up around.
So it's like gaining... It's like making gravity. It's adding to the force of gravity to accelerate the marbles.
So a big thing with like perpetual motion machines is that the biggest and hardest part of them is where do you hide the battery in it?
Sure, I like them in the same way that I like magic tricks.
Yeah,
like it's a fun little desk toy.
Right.
Yep. One more super interesting one that I found for perpetual motion is the Beverly clock in New Zealand.
Ooh, I have to look this up.
So the physics department at a college in New Zealand has a clock that hasn't been wound manually since its construction in 1864 by its creator, Arthur Beverly. And the way it works is it has again, partial vacuum sealed, and there's some diaphragms inside the clock that that help the clock operate. When the temperature outside the clock changes more than 6 degrees, the atmospheric pressure will cause the diaphragm to move inside the clock.
Okay.
And when you first brought this up, I was not expecting it to be like, it looks like a grandfather clock.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's an old clock, 1864, but all of it has all these diaphragms and whatnot in it that just help it run. And it hasn't had, oh, it is 6 degrees Fahrenheit. I was assuming Celsius because it was in New Zealand. It's 3.3 degrees Celsius. But it relies on atmospheric pressure and daily temperature to operate. So it hasn't been manually wound since its creation.
I don't know if you know the answer to this follow-up question or not, but so that would be the external force, the atmospheric pressure, and it hasn't been wound for that long. Does that mean it won't need to be wound?
I am assuming it's going to need wound again at some point.
Okay.
It hasn't been constantly running either, for the record. It has stopped a number of occasions when its mechanism needs cleaned or there was a failure, or even when the temperature difference isn't great enough to change it. But once the servicing is done, it will restart. And once the temperature difference is enough, it will start itself again.
Okay, well that is interesting. I didn't know that was a thing.
A lot of these are really interesting because they're very close to being what an average person would say is, oh, this is perpetual motion, but it does rely on some kind of external power, not necessarily electricity, but, for example, it's a temperature gradient.
Yep. Along electricity, there's one more. The Oxford electric bell is an interesting one, too.
More Google.
So that one uses batteries. It was made in 1840. Fun fact, we don't actually know what it's made of, but it's made of old battery called a dry pile, and it's alternating metals in a stack, which will give an electric charge. And there's a little metal strip in between the two bells, and when it hits one bell, it'll gain a charge. And since it's the same charge as that bell, it'll repel it to hit the other bell, and the other bell attracts it because it's the opposite charge. It's been alternating back and forth since its creation in 1840. But it seems like it's perpetual motion, but it actually isn't, because they are batteries that's powering it, and those batteries will die one day. We don't know when, because we don't know what it's made of.
Oh, interesting.
We're not going to take it apart to find out because it's still working.
Sure.
But
yeah,
one day it will stop.
That's what the Energizer Bunny must run on.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
It's not actually Energizer batteries.
That's why he's guarding the secret.
He's guarding the secret. He just keeps going and going and going. We are not sponsored by Energizer.
No, but if they want to reach out and give us some money. I mean, another one that I think is often looked at as like, oh, we could solve all of our problems with this is gravity. I guess we've already talked about gravity a little bit, but I was actually thinking specifically of things like water wheels and hydroelectric dams. And those are great and they work pretty well, but they still rely on some kind of external push. And it would be water in this particular case. And when the water dries up, then that's the end of it. It doesn't keep on going in the absence of the initial push. The Earth is one big heat engine, so like it could theoretically keep on going for quite some time, but climates change and weather patterns change, and so sometimes it just doesn't work the way you want it to, because it's not perpetual motion.
That reminds me of a thing I learned about within probably the past 2 years or something, and just think is kind of a cool concept, is a gravity battery.
Oh, yeah.
Which to my understanding, and both of you correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm the layman here. To my understanding, it's you use power to draw a weight up like a crane, and then it is basically storing potential kinetic energy. And then when that weight falls, that energy is converted into power.
Okay.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, it's used pretty frequently with things that are renewable but sort of don't work 100% of the time. So things like solar, because, obviously solar doesn't work at night. and like wind power, because it's not windy 24/7. So when there's an excess of power being generated, then it will store that power by doing exactly what you said. It'll ratchet this weight up a tower, and then when there's less power being produced, the weight falls down and it turns the potential energy back into electrical energy. It's super cool. I love the concept.
Yeah, I think they're fun to like look at, because I just didn't know it was a thing. I remember, I mean, it's been a while now, but it's still a fairly recent discovery of mine. I think they're neat.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently I did know about them. I just didn't know that they were called gravity batteries, and now I'm going to research that after this.
Fair. And then you can come back and talk to us about gravity batteries.
Yeah. Or you could build one for us. That'd be fine.
I mean, I have some old grandfather clocks.
For everyone.
I mean, technically, that's kind of the same principle, just not electrical.
Yeah, there's examples of like a pendulum clock on the Wikipedia page. I was like, yeah, that kind of makes sense.
Okay. I didn't know. Well, that's new to me now too, because I didn't put that together.
Yeah.
Cool. See, physics is fun, listeners.
Yeah. The other thing I have to say about the perpetual motion is, in the wise words of Homer Simpson, in this house we obey the laws of thermodynamics.
Yeah.
I was waiting for that.
I like that.
If you have any thoughts on that or anything else we talked about this episode, you can email us at feedback@vaguelyscientific.com, or you can comment on our blog, or you can like us on Facebook. And hey, Jim, where do we get all these wacky questions?
We get them from you, the listener. And if you have a question that needs to be answered in a vaguely scientific manner, you can email us at questions@vaguelyscientific.com. If you want to get our episodes the minute that they're released, you can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcast, YouTube, Spotify, and all the other really cool places that podcasts like to hang out. And subscribing and leaving feedback really helps us out, and so does telling your friends.
It's the closest to perpetual motion they'll ever get.
Our vaguely musical intro is composed by Anthony Pizzelli, and don't forget to check out our merch store over at vaguelyscientific.threadless.com. There's all kinds of cool stuff over there that you can get a lot of different designs on, and every once in a while we throw new stuff on there, so you got to keep an eye out.
Yeah. So thank you to Jonathan for being our guest this week.
Yeah, it's always lots of fun.
Yay! For Vaguely Scientific, I am Derek.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Jonathan.
And that's all, folks.
Toodaloo.
See ya.
When I actually prepare stuff that is like really sciencey and math, I'm like, I need to get all of it in here.
Yeah, because you did all that work.
Because, yeah, it happens so rarely.
There's no such thing as the sunk cost fallacy on Vaguely Scientific. Unless we're talking about somebody else's sunk cost fallacy, never our own.
There's a t-shirt quote right there. There's no such thing as the sunk cost fallacy. It's not in the actual episode, but it's